All right, good morning. Happy Monday. Happy MLK Day. Another holiday, Monday, another holiday. This time, I am getting ready to take my kids skiing for the first time ever. So hopefully you can hear the sound and everybody can hear me or see me. That would be a good start. My kids have never ever been skiing. They've never been on skis or on a snowboard, so this was like a little foray into something completely different. So we're going to see how that goes. But without further ado, I'm going to get rolling. Let me hit the watch and we'll get started. I apologize for a little bit of the shaky video because I have to sort of hold the camera today. Okay, we're off. So today is really a lot of things to kind of cover. First and foremost, I want to talk a little bit about good morning, Mark, what I took away from Graham sessions. And although, there's sort of like a code of secrecy, so I'm not going to go into the details, but I will just say it kind of plays into today's topic, which is to push ourselves to be inclusionary. So the background of this and the timing of it, of course, kind of fits in with the whole theme of where we've been going. But the timing of it is perfect on MLK Day. So I was listening to this business radio. Sometimes I'll listen to it on the car, Bloomberg in New York City, and they cover a whole range of topics. It's a good station. And what they were talking about was the idea of diversity versus being inclusionary. And it really struck me, and I think the reason why it struck me is because, of course, I see everything through the lens of health, but it struck me with the idea of, how can we learn and kind of grow from what we have available to us. So the idea is that they were talking about diversity and how there's a business case for it, and the business case ultimately was that if you have different opinions, different people from different thought backgrounds and experiences, that you're going to have a much more creative solution on the other side, right? So if you have a table of folks and you're kind of around the table with folks, you're trying to solve some problem, that the more experience people have from different parts of the world and different, life, they're going to see the world differently. They're going to say, hey, what about this? They're going to try some creative solution. So that was kind of the basics of it. And then the diversity officer kind of gets on and says, hey, one thing that we're really trying to do is we're trying to go away from the term diversity. And of course, that sort of struck me. I thought that was odd. And she said, what we're really trying to do is go toward the word inclusionary. And the main reason why is because it kind of makes us go from, yes, it's a nice thing, we should all do it, to how do we take barriers down? How do we find ways of getting, what we want to happen? And to me, of course, I see that through the lens of population health. And so, the first thing I have to say is that, the conversation seems to be getting much more mature. The idea that, removing barriers and finding ways to make health the easy way is in many ways what she was saying. She was saying, how can we find ways to make, the automatic? How can we change the automatic? How can we change the default setting? And the way that we change the default setting of our environment, of course, is to remove barriers and to what we want and put barriers up to the things that we don't want. So in many ways, kind of an environmental approach toward changing behavior, sort of engineering the environment. Now, to me, of course, that is Population Health 101, and in its sense, it's the much more pure version of what population health is, right? The idea that we're trying to drive a population, a whole group, towards something by engineering the experience slightly differently. Now, that's very different than someone who's trying to make a health change by changing a behavior, right? Like if you're actively going after it and saying, hey, I want to change a behavior, I want to eat better, I want to exercise more, whatever, like that's not really population health, because that's a one-by-one, in its most pure sense, it's a one-by-one approach versus we're trying to move the herd. We have, 1,000 people standing there. We're trying to get them all to go through that door over there. How are we going to do it? How are we going to engineer the environment? Put up barriers, barricades in some places and make it very obvious with signs in others. So that's kind of the thinking. That's the theory behind it. So in my mind, of course, I was racing along, and then, I got out to San Diego and at the Graham sessions, and I'll just say one of the topics that was up for discussion was, diversity and inclusion. So it worked out very, very well for me, and I really had an eye-opening experience. I mean, the panel who kind of set up the topic and the conversations that happened afterward, and again, we're kind of sworn to secrecy, so I can't tell you the details of it, but what I found was really profound is that people wanted to go there and they wanted to explore this topic. And to me, at its root, what it really came down to was the idea of pushing ourselves to be inclusionary, to have compassion, to see people as people first. And when we do that, it's a whole lot easier to make change and make things happen. So I think that there's a lot there. I think that there's a lot there when it comes to how we approach our day-to-day. There's a lot there in how we approach care for one another, and there's a lot there in our ability to actually move the needle. So fast forward to this morning, here we are, we're sort of driving to, the Poconos, which is in Pennsylvania. It's not too far, about an hour away. And, we're flipping through the radio stations, and of course, MLK's famous speech comes on. And as it comes on, you hear, of course, the passion in this guy's voice. I mean, I don't know how you couldn't be moved by just his full-on commitment to what he's trying to do. But it happens to be the speech where he says, look, I've seen the promised land. I don't know that I'll get there with you, but I've seen it, and I know we're going to get there. Mine eyes have seen the glory. I mean, like, to me, that is a physiologically rousing speech. I mean, that gives me goosebumps. It makes me want to cry. It makes me want to fist fight and cry at the same time. It's just emotionally, viscerally, moving. And so, I take all of those things and I'm trying to say, well, what's the common thread there? What's the common theme? Why is that do what it does? And it's because in its most root form, it's people struggling to achieve something, and that we all understand what struggle feels like and how hard it is. And of course, I will never understand what that particular level of intensity of struggle feels like. I will never understand what that level of vigilance where you don't feel safe in your own environment and your own skin. I'll never understand that because I'll never live it. But what we can do is we can push ourselves to understand it. And if we can push ourselves to understand it, we can be better at what we do. Because if we can understand it, then we can actually empathize and we can find ways of changing the barriers that we see and what exist. And so in that sense, what that means to me and what I take from that is the idea that if we can begin to think about pushing ourselves to include, because the only way we can really understand is to have shared experiences. And so that's kind of where the whole thing comes full circle for me, is that the more we can find ways to share the experience, and of course in hopefully a calm and relaxed way, but that's how we're really going to learn. We're not going to learn by reading it in a book. We're not going to learn this kind of a thing by reading it in a research study. We're going to learn by doing it. And when we do it, we're going to take amazing lessons, things that we never in a million years thought we could learn, and then we can apply those and learn the next thing. And then we can apply those and learn the next thing. And so in a sense, I guess that's what I'm calling for. I'm calling for us now to say, okay, you followed this theme along a little bit. And by the way, I got one hell of a lesson on hugging, just so everyone knows. During the weekend, lots of people were ready and they were giving it. And then someone said, hey, Mike, first thing you got to understand is hugs are done right-handed. So head has to go to the right, and then we're heart to heart, and we got a really good hug. So just beware. Now I've got technique now. But again, that's a perfect example. As awkward as that is to be a left-handed hugger and feel like you're going to headbutt somebody every time that you do that, all I needed was to do it and get a little lesson, and now here we go. Now I'm moving forward. The point is that when we push ourselves to include, when we actually find ways to push ourselves to be in the environment where we're doing, where we're tinkering, we're messing around with things, then we're learning. And when we're learning, then we can begin to sort of say, okay, look, there's research that supports this. And that's exactly what I found today. I can't wait to dive into it. I haven't done it yet, but Richard Boyatzis, who is sort of a well-known guy on compassion and empathy and focus, and you can find some, they did a really cool review about this idea of putting compassion into our coaching style. Right? Trying to use empathy to its fullest degree, trying to relate and feel what the other person feels so that we can then begin, to take down the barriers and say, hey, how can I help change the environment to do what you need to do? So I guess what I'm calling for here is 1% improvement. Just 1%. That's kind of the main goal, I think. Because that's all many of us probably will be able to tackle today. But if we can make a 1% improvement every day, that kind of old coaching technique of, look, just take one baby step forward today. Find a way to just be that little bit more inclusionary. And so that's going to kind of be the lesson that I'm going to be pushing for. That's the grind that I talked about last week. That idea of, all right, so we've got to grind it out, and we've got to find ways to kind of build on that grind. It all kind of comes back to that same idea that our country is in a very, like, it's a terrible time right now. I mean, it's a rough time, and there are a lot of people who are hurting for a lot of different reasons. And some of those reasons relate to the environment that we're in, the social environment that we're in, the exclusionary environment that we're in, and the barriers that we put up. And the health of the population as a result of that is suffering. And because of that, we are in crisis mode. And at the end of the day, when you're in crisis mode, you honestly don't give a shit who's standing next to you. You just want to go forward. It's a crisis. It doesn't matter if this person looks like you, smells like you, acts like you, whatever. Like, none of that matters. Because at the end of the day, we have a crisis situation. And what we really need to have happen is we need to fix that crisis. And so, as you know, and everybody knows, I mean, in my 5 minutes left, America, in my mind, is in a health crisis. I mean, it's not like a problem. It's beyond that. It is absolutely, the earth is opening up and crazy shit is happening. And so that health crisis is an idea of a crisis in many ways of despair. That despair is because in many ways people are breaking down as a result of a stressful life. That stressful life that's beyond the ability to kind of balance and control, or so it seems, that stressful life is keeping people from doing things that are happy, healthy, and going to be something they can push forward with. So all of those things come back to the idea of none of that can happen if you don't have a base on which you can build. And of course, in my mind, that base is health. So all of that thing comes back down to the idea of what are we really doing here? Like, why are we really talking about this? Why do we really exist as professionals? Where we really exist as professionals is to unleash the potential of people, to unleash the potential of our population, to get them to be the very best they can possibly be. And I think today is a really, really good day to reflect on that and say, okay, so this is a person who saw a problem, saw a nation in crisis, and was personally affected by it. But if you talk to people who are sort of in the thick of that, and one of the things that really touched me this weekend was somebody who is experiencing that. One of the comments this person made was, none of those things happen or could happen without allies. You couldn't do it. The civil rights movement couldn't have happened without the allies around them, without the people who are supporting them, trying to find ways to take down barriers, trying to find ways to solve the crisis. And so I think that's the lesson that we can learn. Is the idea if we can push ourselves, maybe 1%, to be inclusionary, to find somebody who looks different than us, who acts different than us, smells different than us, and bring them in. Put our arm around them. Say, hey, can you please come in? I need to learn from you. Because if I can learn from you, I can understand a little bit how the world, according to you, is about what you're doing. The more I can learn from you, the more I can kind of modify my format, my approach, and the more creative I can be. So I think that's really my push, is that if we're going to change population health, if we're going to change the entire population, and not just our little tiny group of people that look just like us and act just like us and smell just like us, we've got to get outside the walls of our echo chamber. That means we've got to include other people. We have to find ways to reach out, say hello, hi, my name is, bring them in, and begin to help take down those barriers, even if only 1% at a time. Whew. All right. Hopefully that makes some sense. I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if these are just all, thoughts that I'm trying to pull together. And I'm kind of like having a therapy session. So thank you for that. Thank you, PT on Ice, for giving me the platform on which I can try to pull these threads together and find them. But at the end of the day, that's really what it is. I mean, if we're going to move the needle on this thing, it is so big. It is such a crisis. It is so overwhelming. If we're really going to do it, it's going to need every single person who possibly is willing to fight. And the best way to do that is to be able to say, yeah, we've seen the promised land. The promised land is health. The promised land is community. The promised land is that when we treat people like people, regardless of whatever they are that brings them to be the way they are, none of that part matters, because at the end of the day, we strip it all off. We're all just people trying to fight the same fight, live a good life, have a high-quality life, and have something left at the end that we can pass down to our families. And if that's the case, then we do that every single day. We don't do it one day when all things are right. We do it every single day, 1% at a time. All right. Push to be inclusionary. It's only Monday. It's MLK Day. I have 1 minute and 30 seconds left. It's a trend. Make it count.